Yeah, there's a lot here. So I haven't had an opportunity to go through everything. Basically, the Justice Department has broken these files down into different categories. There are categories that just pertain to court records, right? Some of these records are documents that have previously been released, but also records that appear to have been a grand jury, or they are grand jury material that judges in recent weeks have said that they would unseal. There's records that actually do relate to previously released documents in response to a FOIA request. There are categories of records that deal with DOJ disclosures under the Epstein Files Transparency Act, and what that contains is there's some Bureau of Prison footage. There's Ghislaine Maxwell's proffer. Some various memos and correspondence that appear to have been previously released. But what I'm seeing right now that appears to be brand new is there are thousands of images. And I have to say, some of these images, even with the redactions, are disturbing. So they're, we're going through that. We're seeing some images of various people in Epstein's orbit who had been traveling with him. There are lots of images of former President Bill Clinton and a trip that was taken in Africa. Right now there are a few documents that kind of show the various correspondence that took place between some attorneys and Epstein's attorneys. So it's going to take a while to go through this, and it's important for me to note as well that Todd Blanche, the Deputy Attorney the Deputy Attorney General, indicated that this would be released in troves, or in batches in the weeks ahead.
When you say they're disturbing, is it because of who you're seeing, who's in them, as you've just talked about them? Or is it because in some ways they're disturbing in terms of their, content?
Yeah, fair question.
Explicit in some way, and yeah.
Right. So the images are marked. Excuse me. There's like a folder, right, or pictures of the folder, and it's marked child sexual abuse material. Oh. And so then there's photographs where there are. I would imagine that many of them are victims. They're blacked out, redacted there. And, you can see Epstein in some of these photos. So the combination of just sort of like that in your face, like this is child sexual abuse material in and of itself is disturbing, knowing what, perhaps what these photographs show.
Jason, what are you hoping to learn? Like we already know this about Jeffrey Epstein. And what he did and what are the unanswered questions that you hope these files answer for you?
Good question. So I am, as I indicated probably a couple of weeks ago when we spoke, I'm looking for records related to money, related to learning more about his wealth, learning about the government's undisclosed, until we reported it, money laundering investigation that took place in 2007 and 2008 that disappeared when Jeffrey Epstein pleaded guilty to a state charge in Florida. So I want to follow the money, and I'm hoping that these documents, whether it's today or in the weeks ahead, will provide additional detail about the government's own money laundering investigation into Jeffrey Epstein. And I think that once we can, learn more about the money, we can sort of figure out how that financed his his sex trafficking operation.
Hey, Jason, one thing I love to ask you about is that, you're someone who makes these FOIA requests. There's a lot of material that can come out. A picture, a document on its own doesn't necessarily mean anything. Like, we have to be smart and careful
Correct.
as we go through this stuff. What is what is top of mind for you as you go through all of this, as there is so much that is a smart thing to be looking out for something, significant in this ongoing investigation of Jeffrey Epstein and the people in his orbit?
Yeah, I think that, what is important or what to look out for are, one is that, these records are supposed to be, at least the correspondence, the government's own records, unredacted, right? The text of the material. And it's, in the whether it's email messages, whether it's the government's own memos, FBI reports, looking at to see how they truly handled this investigation, right? The reason we're here now is because, of reporting that the Miami Herald did back in 2018, that kind of, took a look at the U.S. attorney at the time, Alex Acosta, and how he ended up, signing off on this non-prosecution agreement. So,
and he was part of the Trump administration too.
Yes, right, exactly.
The first Trump administration. Yeah.
And so, we've seen reports related to it, but this is really getting deeper into the weeds. So kind of looking at the FBI's own, files related to that, kind of, in a sense, the records, leaving the pictures aside, right? Because there's many different stories that, one could write out of all of these records. But really kind of getting deep into the weeds and explaining to the public how this happened, how Jeffrey Epstein was allowed to, at least initially, escape federal charges. What did the FBI know? What did they learn? Who did they speak to? Are there any other individuals that they were investigating? Thomas Massey, the chair of the government oversight, the House Judiciary Committee, he had said yesterday that there should be, 20 different people who should have been charged. Okay, well, who are those individuals? Will they disclose, those names? Did those, individuals, reach some kind of the plea agreement of their own, or cooperated? So there's a lot here. It's re-examining the government's own investigation, and what essentially they did during that time that led to Jeffrey Epstein escaping those charges.
Jason, we want to mention the White House has put out a statement, a response to the drop from the DOJ, the Epstein materials. And it says the Trump administration is the most transparent in history by releasing thousands of pages of documents, cooperating with the House Oversight Committee's subpoena request, and President Trump recently calling for further investigations into Epstein's Democratic friends or Democrat friends. The Trump administration has done more for the victims than Democrats ever have. And while President Trump is delivering on his promises, Democrats like Hakeem Jeffries and Stacey Plaskett have yet to explain why they were soliciting money in meetings from Epstein after he was a convicted sex offender. The American people deserve answers. Are we going to get answers out of this? Yeah, go ahead.
First, I do want to say, it's kind of funny that the Obama administration had called themselves the most transparent administration in history. As someone who deals with documents regularly, as you know, prying loose from government, there is no, most transparent in history. So just wanted to note that. But I think that this is an example of what is going to go on for some time. I don't think that the release of these records, even though there's a lot here right now, is going to satisfy everyone, right? Because there's always going to be those questions. Well, what didn't they release, or why don't we have this, or people kind of interpreting
Jason,
those records.
How will we know it's exhaustive?
That's a great question, and again, I'll circle back to what Congressman Thomas Massey said. There are certain records that should be here. There's certain categories of records. FBI, what's known as 302 reports. These are interview summaries that the FBI prepares after they speak to witnesses, people that are under suspicion. Those records are not there. Those specific interview summaries, we know it's not exhaustive. But the Justice Department, in response to the Epstein Files Transparency Act, they have to provide additional details within 2 weeks, as a matter of fact, about what they released, what they redacted, why they redacted it, and answer those questions.
But they're already not meeting a deadline today by not releasing everything.
Correct. Yeah.
What's the consequence of that?
Well, there's lots of threats of consequences, and those threats do come from lawmakers, but it doesn't appear to be anything that is certainly written into the legislation itself that says if you do not meet this deadline, you'll immediately go to jail, or you're arrested, or anything like that. Right. So to me, I think the consequences we're going to see at this point is just going to be lots of threats.